Right, so in what is the latest example of banned chemical weapons being used by the Israeli army, Israel now stands accused of dropping depleted uranium on Beirut, a munition that causes devastating damage to lives and the environment for years. The fallout from using such weaponry well known from the Iraq War, where the US used depleted uranium warheads to horrifying consequence. This isn't the only chemical weapon attack Israel have been caught using either, as the weaponisation of asbestos by the IDF in Gaza will likely blight lives for years going forwards as well. The depths of depravity Israel are now sinking to risk health issues, ailments and unlivable areas being created for years to come, and still the world seems unable or unwilling to stop them. Right, so depleted uranium being used in Lebanon now. Apparently all the white phosphorus being used to bomb Beirut with just wasn't a big enough of a war crime apparently, so now Israel have gone radioactive instead. Depleted uranium warheads. If they're not already internationally banned, as some allude to, they damn well should be, you might imagine. And the claim Israel are using such munitions is coming from the syndicate of chemists in Lebanon, who have stated that the scale of destruction and the depth of penetration, which has been recorded as dozens of meters, is proof of the munitions apparently being used. The Lebanese Association of Social Medicine in Lebanon concurs with their assessment, and in order to prove that Israel are using such horrendous weapons in civilian areas, they have requested samples be taken from the bomb sites in order to provide evidence for a United Nations international investigation, as this excerpt from the Cradle explains all about it. President of the Lebanese Association of Social Medicine, Raif Reda, called for collecting samples from the bombing sites and sending reports to the United Nations so the world can witness the bloody criminal history of the Zionist enemy, according to statements reported by the national news agency NNA. Warheads made with depleted uranium casings are designed to penetrate deep fortifications, causing significant destruction and releasing toxic gases. They are also radioactive and have been linked to massive increases in cancer rates in Iraq following the US wars on that country in 1991 and 2003. Lebanese newspaper L'Orient Today reports that Israeli air forces may have used depleted uranium bombs when its air force dropped 80 one-ton, 2,000-pound bombs on at least 4 residential buildings in Beirut's southern suburbs on September 27th to kill Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. The New York Times notes that a video released by the Israeli army showed that the warplanes that flew the mission to assassinate Nasrallah were each equipped with 6 US-made BLU-109 missiles. L'Orient Today notes that according to a report from the US Naval Institute, the most common type of explosives inside these missiles are bombs classified as GBU-31. These guided munitions are known for their ability to penetrate heavily reinforced concrete or steel structures thanks to a casing made of depleted uranium, DU, used for its high density, which enhances the bomb's resistance upon ground impact, the Lebanese newspaper added. The Israeli Air Force has already been known to use these bombs in Gaza. A report submitted to the UN Human Rights Commission documented the drop of GBU-31, GBU-32 and GBU-39 bombs, documented airstrikes by the Israeli Air Force carried out on residential buildings, a school, refugee camps and a market between October 9th and December 2nd, 2023. So depleted uranium is used to make the casings for warheads so they penetrate deeper into the ground upon impact, causing bigger and deeper explosions. And when you consider Hassan Nasrallah or Hezbollah's headquarters were underground, the logic of such a munition makes sense. But despite that, it should have been off the table because you were using it in civilian areas, given the fallout for years afterwards that is caused by this type of munition. Depleted uranium is radioactive. Less so than standard uranium, but in a way that's actually worse because it's more stable and has a much longer half-life. Everything it comes into contact with becomes irradiated, including the copious amounts of material a bomb coated in this stuff will kick up. Dust breathed in and the gases released will be radioactive, and the ground across the surrounding area will be contaminated for years. For example, the US used depleted uranium warheads during the Gulf War in between 1990 and 1997, and childhood cases of leukemia shot up by 60% in Iraq during that time period. And birth defects in Basra, which was hit particularly hard during that war with depleted uranium ordnance, saw these birth defects triple over that same time period. The US used the same weaponry in Iraq again during the Iraq War. The city of Fallujah was hit hard in 2004, and again a spike of birth defects was observed. Depleted uranium has also been used in the Bosnian War between 1992 and 95, the bombing of Serbia in 1999, and airstrikes on Syria in 2015. Apart from birth defects and childhood cancers, however, depleted uranium in the environment, able to be inhaled or otherwise ingested, can have long-term health impacts targeting especially the systems relating to the kidneys, brain, liver and heart. It is bad stuff. Contrary to some sources on this matter, though, depleted uranium weaponry is not illegal. Both the US and UK are apparently the only nations in the world with it in a weaponised form, and the Tories sold some of the stuff to Ukraine last year. Despite being inherently poisonous in law, it is not its first primary use, as weapons designed to poison or asphyxiate are banned under the Geneva Conventions. Depleted uranium is a controversial exception, as it is primarily recognised in law as a form of nuclear weapon, even though it is used in the casings, and the same conventions that cover poisonous or suffocating weaponry does not cover nuclear armaments, so it's subject to a loophole. As such, Israel using it in and of itself wouldn't appear to be illegal, but using it in populated areas, I think ought to be. Certainly could be construed to be. I dare say a case for that could be made. Certainly ought to be, but if only the UK and US have weaponised forms of it, who then sold it to Israel? I'd love to hear the reasoning behind whoever did that, and if it was us, with Keir Starmer saying we can keep selling Israel weapons for defensive purposes only, but truly justifying selling depleted uranium warheads for that purpose, if it was us, there's no case, in no way, can these be argued to be defensive weapons. They are designed for penetrative damage, not in any way as a deterrent. As that Cradle excerpt also alluded to, though, it seems there is evidence that Israel have already been using depleted uranium in Gaza as well, which, if they plan to colonise Gaza afterwards, does seem to be a really stupid thing to do, if you're going to contaminate the land and the air. But Israel haven't stopped at depleted uranium in their bid to make Gaza as uninhabitable as possible. The fact they've been levelling as many structures as possible has been adding to that problem too. And could this be deliberate? You see, Gaza, as you might imagine, being under Israeli occupation for as long as it has, you don't really see it as having a particularly robust construction industry, let's say. Many of the buildings before they were flattened were of a certain age, let's put it. And that certain age means they were full of something we've been actively getting rid of in the West in our buildings for years, because Gaza is literally riddled with asbestos. Israel's wanton destruction of Israeli buildings has been blowing asbestos particles up into the air, and as a result, higher than average cases of asbestos-related cancers are expected to be reported in the region for decades to come. And that will affect Israelis as much as Gazans in the area, because asbestos will not discriminate between the self-styled chosen people and those suffering under their oppressive subjugation. The UN has estimated that some 800,000 tons of rubble across Gaza is contaminated with asbestos. Here's an Al Jazeera excerpt on the subject, and for the record, the chap mentioned is no relation of mine that I know of. This is a death sentence for Palestinians trapped in Gaza, leading asbestos expert Roger Willey told Al Jazeera. The asbestos exposure of people caught in the aftermath of each of Israel's bombing raids can be compared to that around the World Trade Center when it collapsed in New York City on September 11, 2001, Willey said. Years later, it became apparent that toxic chemicals, including asbestos, were in the dust clouds. I made a prediction then, in 2001, that more people would die from the asbestos-related diseases than were killed in the September 11th attacks, Willey said. According to the World Trade Center Health Program, 4,343 survivors and first responders have died from related illnesses since the attack, compared to the 2,974 people who died on September 11th. It's going to be exactly the same in Gaza, Willey continued. Airborne concentrations of asbestos will be enormously high, and that is guaranteed mesothelioma, Willey said, referring to a cancer that commonly forms in the lining around the lungs or abdomen. Asbestos exposure can also result in cancers of the lung, larynx and ovaries, as well as asbestosis, which the US National Cancer Institute describes as an inflammatory condition affecting the lungs that can cause shortness of breath, coughing and permanent lung damage. If using depleted uranium in urban areas is not illegal by now, it damn well should be. And perhaps what we're witnessing here will only herald such action, but only if it becomes known about. And when our mainstream media completely ignored this story, many people here will not be aware of it, may not even be aware possibly of the fact that these weapons even exist, Or the possibility that such weapons came Israel's way from us, at that as a possibility? We need to know. Meanwhile, as Israel continue their assault on Lebanon, currently still standing between them and towns and villages of innocent Lebanese people, is UNIFIL Outpost 652, currently manned by 30 Irish peacekeepers who have refused to abandon their post in the face of the advancing Israeli army, all that's protecting them now. Courage on steroids, heroes every one of them. Get the details of their story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.